Hey, good to see you back. Yeah, just wondering. All right, time to start the class. Come on in and find a seat. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, there you go. Okay. My throat's dry today, so I have a lozenge in, so I'll be fooling with that. Good to see all of you here this morning. I'm going to cover the few spots for December. It's hard to do class in December because everybody's coming and going. And Lance finished up his class. And I'll tell you, I want to just say thanks to Lance and appreciate, I'm getting the feedback, appreciate what he did. I know a lot of that material for some of us is hard to go through, but I enjoy it. I'm a geek like he is as far as the universe and God's imprint. But going through something like that, it really should give us confidence as Christians, even if you don't know, you're not a Bible scholar or you're not a scientist. Hearing information like that and understanding, am I getting up? Is that me? Hearing information like that and understanding God's imprint on everything, it really helps you, the academia world and the scientist world, it really helps you to see how silly that is and gives you confidence, even though you don't have that mindset and that knowledge, not to be afraid to stand up and ask questions, simple questions. And with all their knowledge, I think the thing that Lance took us through shows how simple and how foolish their thinking is. And you can always go back to the Bible and things that God said. The Bible verse that always stood out to me when I was younger was that he uses this simple things to confound the wise. And we see that, in that type of thinking. I sound like I'm getting feedback. Is that okay? She says no. So I appreciate Lance doing that. What I want to do is clean up a little bit where I kind of left off. It's a good conversation. We were talking about taming our tongues, and we had a lot of good discussion about taming our tongues, about what the tongue is and what it can do, and then we went into how we speak using cuss words, and thankfully no one in here has used cuss words, so it was an easy conversation. But then we went into about how we talk to other people, how people see us, once we even tame our tongues, we go into about, well, then what comes out of our mouth, controlled, because we control it. How do people see us? How do they perceive us? What do they know about us? And the things that they know about us, when you meet someone other than the visual, the second thing they're going to know about you is when you open your mouth and what you say and how you talk. Can you tell where someone's from in this country as soon as they start speaking? Right.
Sometimes.
So like Daryl Crawford, right? You can tell where he's from as soon as he starts speaking. I would have thought he was from Texas too. But so the dialect, and when I don't guess we even really think about that, but how we say a particular word, the way it comes out in the dialect, we pick up on that. That's how fine-tuned that we are, that we can pick up just on a dialect of someone and already process information of where that person's from. And then when we start talking and putting together sentences or the words that we choose to let come out of our mouths, that's a whole nother piece of information that will tell people who we are, where what and what we're about. Jesus always condemned the Pharisees because they always spoke things, but they didn't follow it up, and he always called them hypocrites. So this morning, what we'll probably do is kind of wrap this up. I wanted to get into a few things. I think I went back and looked at the class and how I finished it, so we'll probably do a little review, but we had a lot of great comments at the end. And Matthew 12:36. And, you know, this is an easy scripture to let go by when you read it. It says, "But I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment." But I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. And the verse 37, "For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned." When you think of how are you condemned by your words? Can somebody give me an example? Can you think of something? How are you condemned by your words? Hold on 1 second. Yeah, Roger.
One way is that it shows people your intellect. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. You know, I think I mentioned this last time. There's a great saying, right? Better to not say anything and be thought a fool, and that's where that's going, than to open your mouth and prove you're a fool. You know, now I just used a term that we're going to get into, and I just said something bad. I used the word fool. We talked about that. Somebody came up to me and we talked about, I think Carson brought it up. It was words that you say as a kid that you're not allowed to say. That was a cuss word, and but it's not really a cuss word. It's just a word that your kids aren't allowed to say. But your kids grow up and they think it's a cuss word. And then so fool was one of them. And the Bible has something to say on that. But they can tell your intellect by the words you use. Ken's not in here. I like to call on Ken because Ken is a man of words. And if you talked with Ken, you appreciate how Ken uses the English language. And it's almost as if we've gotten lackadaisical. We've gotten lazy on how we talk to each other. Part of that may be because I think that we've found quicker ways to communicate, so we don't put time and effort into being very proper when we talk as far as our words, and I think a lot of words are probably going to be lost with the definition and the inference that go around it, because we just shoot out little words out of our mouths to try to convey information. So the Bible says that we're going to be condemned, and like Roger pointed out, when you open your mouth and say something that might tell your intelligence, how else are we going to be condemned by what we say, Josh?
Oh, I was going to say that a lot of people here today, they use so many curse words, and what you mentioned earlier last time is how sometimes people would use curse words to emphasize a point. Well, you can, as you pointed out earlier, I mean, you can emphasize a point without having to use curse words. And see, that's the thing. A lot of people think that cursing makes them look cool, but it really makes them look ignorant. And it shows their ignorance. Because, again, you can get angry without cursing. You can still emphasize a point and get it across without having to use foul language.
Yeah, it seems like too, and I don't know why that we, as a society, put people on a pedestal, especially like in sports, like Tom in baseball. You know, is there a lot of cussing in baseball? I'm not a huge baseball follower. Yeah. Okay, and I do remember seeing something when it was Little League baseball, and the parents, it was a video, and it was just brutal. It was brutal what the parents were yelling out at these kids and the coaches, and it was a kid baseball game. You know, there's something going around now, I think, on the NFL. Anybody know Marshawn Lynch? Is that his name? You know, he's cool. You know, he's on these talk. He's doing, I guess, these talk show things, or he's on the TV a lot, and so we're watching it. And the thing is, they're supposed to be funny and neat, but his mouth is blurred out by every second word, and they're all laughing, you know, and he's saying something real important. I said, what could he possibly say that's important where they have to blur his mouth out every second or third word? You know, and of course, what you see on TV is just in the box. It's not real. And people, so, but I think we think that because that's what we see, so we get afraid to be the odd one and to call something out. Yes, sir, or yes, ma'am.
You know, I'm trying to Google the scripture. Death and life lieth in the power of the tongue.
Yeah.
And then also when we speak, we let everybody know what's up here.
That's
Not so
scary.
much our smartness,
Right,
but whether evil is in there.
right.
You know, so
Right.
that's God is looking at the evil that is in our heart, and it'll eventually come out in our speech.
Right. There's something in there about a good tree and a bad tree, right? And the fruit that it produces, and the Bible speaks to that. The words you use, the way you talk, is really just is the fruit that's coming out, and it shows the tree. The Bible uses comparisons of fresh water and salt water, I guess you'd say, or you know, you can't come out of the same. You can't have fresh and salt out of the same stream, and so what we say, what comes out, what we choose to use, it could be a scary thing. When Edie and I were dating, and we met online, and we were using an online message service, and then that kind of we progressed on that, and we started texting each other. I had never talked to her. She had never talked to me. We never heard each other, so we text each other. And so, you know, texting is great. You could read it 5, 6 times before you send it. But and then it came time for the phone call, and I may have repeated myself before, but that's a scary thing because now you're real live. What's coming out of your mouth is coming out of your mouth. Are they going to think you're uneducated? Are they going to think you're silly? Are they going to think you're dumb? Because now you have to use this instrument, right? Our brains are always working, and we come up with great things and great thoughts. But sometimes our hearts get in the way when it comes out, or our intent is wrong and it gets in the way. One thing wrong about texting, communication-wise, is you can't see, you misread the intent. Has anyone ever done that? Texting? You ever see a text from someone and you're reading it in your mind and say, oh, man, listen to them. They are just going off the handle on me. Why? What did I do? But you're already attributing that to a text that has no, it's just 2D. It's just text. Yeah, Aaron. And so, and then we get mad, right? Because we read a text and we're already reading it in preconceived notion of how someone's intending it. So then, man, we're going to fire off another text. I can't believe they said that. And all they're doing is just, they made a comment, you know, and it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, just to reinforce what you said, I once read that to never have, if you were having an argument with someone, be it your spouse or anyone, if you ever, don't use text to communicate that type of message, because intent, you cannot discern intent from text message conversations, because one person could perceive it one way and another person can perceive it. The intent was not to be malicious or harmful, but it could be perceived that way if the reader doesn't know the intent of the sender.
Well, that's the truth. Also, the good important point Aaron made there, but didn't know he just made it, was that you never send an argument text to your wife, because then there's a record of it. Because you can always go back and play dumb. You say, I didn't say that. Yeah, you did. Yes, ma'am.
Going back to your point with regard to the sports, I know that my husband and I have had a real challenging, some challenges with Bradley in sports and football. And you mentioned the Little League or what have you, and it's also just very dominant in football. And so we've had to pull Bradley off of numerous teams because of how the coaches were speaking to him or speaking to the children. And, you know, my husband will have to, of course, have conversations with them and let them know that in so many words, if I don't speak to my child that way, neither will you, because it started to affect Bradley emotionally. And so, you know, anyway, but that's the power.
That's got to be tough to have kids in sports like that. I know the boys, they were in Taekwondo when they were real little, and then they were in soccer, and I was their soccer coach. And one of the reasons for that is because then I could run the field on content, language, trying to be a good example for the other kids, because we had one kid on there that his dad had been a professional soccer player at one time. Well, he would stand on the opposite side of the field and be yelling at the kids from the opposite side, coaching them during the game when I was the coach, and so I typed a big old letter to him and I said, hey, I don't appreciate that, and he was being, he wasn't using the best language and things of that nature. Yes, sir.
So a couple things. Well, first and foremost, did we mention James? I noticed
Yes, we actually started this whole thing
I figured we started
years
in
ago
James.
in James.
So if James with the tongues of fire,
Yep.
and we're talking about Proverbs with the, and it's not so much about evil, but it was like a fool is considered wise until he opens his mouth.
Yep.
But when we dove down a rabbit hole with sports, that was one of the reasons I never pushed my kids into sports, because I was in sports and I know what goes on in a boys' locker room. I know what goes on in the men's locker room, and there's nothing Christian going on in there from all aspects.
Right.
We have to be the stronger influence than the world. The world's a very powerful influence, and they're constantly being inundated from it. Now, we can't put them in Christian ghettos, because they're going to experience it one way or the other, and you just prepare them for it. And it's an 18, 20-year battle to try and figure out where's the fine line, of instructing them. Is like, well, this is not Christ-like, but this is stuff you're going to have to tolerate, in the interim,
Right.
and teaching them how to tolerate it.
Yeah, and every kid's different. I got fortunate with Carson and Trevor. They were always independent. They never ran around with the crowd. They never had peer pressure that I remember talking to them about it. But your kid has to be tough today in sports, and they could either go two ways. It could either influence them or they can be an influence. We have people, thankfully, still. The world's not all lost. We have people like Tim Tebow is. He's a public figure that uses his platform for good, things of that nature. But yeah, that's where we learn it, and I know you probably missed the beginning of all this, but learning as a young age how to control and tame our tongues. And unfortunately, when we see, and sports, unfortunately, is an area where there's a lot of role models in sports, and kids will, and for some reason, kids don't want to hear your parents every day because they're with you every day. That's one of those things where I can tell my kid, 100 times, here's something that would be a great idea, and then after 5 years down the road, 6 years down the road, they come from their friend's house. Oh, what his dad said to me? He said, oh, I'm going to start doing this. I've been saying that to you for 5 years. You never heard it. Yes, sir, George.
I have noticed, and I'm sure a lot of other people have noticed the same thing, that the times that people lose control of their words, they may be one of those people that has real good control of their words, but when there is a period of high emotion in that person,
Yeah.
and I could name some of those emotions. One is anger, we've already mentioned that. One is fear. Inferiority is a form of fear. So sometimes you get in a situation where you feel inferior, and what do? You change your language to overcome that. Some is great joy. There are a number of other emotions. So one is pain.
Yeah.
And those are times when we just lose control of our tongue. And we need to say, well, I've got too much emotion, calm down, because that's when I'm going to do something I shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, that's I think if we learn that early on, you're talking about being a better Christian, being in a place where you're ahead of everybody else, and you learn to control those emotions. Or if you have emotions, Jesus had emotions. Jesus went in and turned the tables over and was angry and whipped people, and now I can't imagine Jesus. Why did I say I can't imagine? I know Jesus didn't do anything unlawful, didn't do anything sinful. He didn't let his tongue get out of control, and he used his tongue against people, rightfully so. And we're gonna hit on that here in just a minute.
In addition to the profanity, which just seems to be predominantly what we're talking about,
Yeah.
you can be just as cutting and backbiting and insulting and not use a bad word, and gossiping. So there's more than just the bad words that can condemn you. If you're constantly going and cutting people down, or gossiping behind their back, or she said lying, misrepresenting things, trying to trick people. And again, it shows your heart,
Right.
and that's how it condemns you.
Yeah, there's 2 more series after this one, and it goes into what's next, and it goes from the tongue to our attitudes and the way we manipulate things, people not using our tongue, it goes into bad attitudes and that kind of thing. So what I want to touch on real quick before we really get into the meat of it is someone had asked me about Matthew 5:22. If you got a Bible, flip to Matthew 5:22. And because I think this is an easy thing that we do as sinful human beings, I guess you'd say. So Jesus is talking here, and Juan's doing an apologetics on Wednesdays, and it's so-called contradictions, and I don't want to really get into that for this class, but this is one of them that may be in there, and it's talking about Jesus says, well, let's just read it, 5:22. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment, and whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. And someone said, when we talked about words kids aren't supposed to use when you're a parent, and you put the emphasis that that's the same as saying a cuss word. You know, fool is one of them. And we have words like stupid and idiot, you know, things like that. But this someone said, well, you know, the Bible calls out about calling someone a fool. And it says you're in danger. It says here, that's a big deal. You could be in danger of hellfire. So what does that mean? Because Jesus called, and like I said, I don't want to get off on it, but Jesus called people a fool, thou fool. And so, you know, what does that mean? And because certainly, has anyone in here ever called anybody a fool?
Only when it's true.
Well, hold on a minute, that's true.
That's kind of what I wanted to mention was that.
Well, what makes that true?
Well, in Proverbs it says, "Don't hang around with fools." Obviously, there must be people who are fools, and obviously, I'm making a judgment as to who that is, so that I can stay away from them. But I mean, is this saying that the literal word "fool" is a bad thing, or are we talking about disparaging someone's character falsely by calling them a fool?
Yeah, you got that's exactly right. You know, and Roger, you're kind of hitting the nail on the head, so we don't have to ferret it out too much. But there's nothing wrong with calling someone a fool. Only it comes into context of what Jesus is saying. Don't call someone a fool. It's not the word, and there's a big debate on what this word is in the actual language. If you want to get into language study, and it compares it to other words that Jesus used, fool, of what that means, and it's someone that's empty-headed, someone that is like we would consider someone who is an atheist a fool, and it would be a righteous judgment if we didn't have anger in our heart, if we weren't calling them a fool out of an angry heart. But we could use that term fool for an atheist because they really don't have a clue about God, and they choose not to think about God, and with all the evidences we just came off of, right?
I think we need to, just what you're saying, we need to be very careful that that we pay attention to what the language, the Hebrew, was talking about. The one in Matthew is referring, it's a term of condemnation.
Right.
So it's not referring necessarily to someone's intellect or their lack of wisdom in making choices or whatever that is. And that's the important thing. We talk about it being a bad word. Well, you know, maybe indeed it is. But we need to be very careful throughout the scripture where that word and words like it are used, that we understand that the Hebrew language had, you know, we have Americanized everything, including words. And so a lot of people don't look at it that way. But what we need to do is to be careful that, especially around anyone, but especially children, that we make sure that they understand that there is a difference in calling someone, you know, we should never use, we brought our kids up, they couldn't use the word stupid.
Right, exactly.
Well, we use it frequently nowadays, but anyway.
But there's a reason for that, like you're saying.
Yeah. there is.
Context. Kids have a hard time discerning context.
Yes, and that's where we as parents, grandparents, anyone who has an influence over children have to be careful that we make sure that they understand if this word, if you hear this word, this is what you need to be careful about.
Right. And, did Jesus have the right to call anybody a fool? I mean, he would be the one, right? He would have way more right to call anybody a fool than I would have a right to call anybody a fool, even if I was trying to do it correctly.
So when we're talking about defining fools, you have three people, different types of people in Proverbs that Solomon speaks about: the wise, the simple, and the fool.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the simple who lack the knowledge, the wisdom. You have the wise, obviously, who have and then you have the fool who has the knowledge but chose poorly. Okay, and now bringing that more into Jesus' time, and he was not he didn't pull any punches when he needed to, when he called people rude.
Yeah.
He was when he was not he was going to call the spade because it was either to it was. I'm not going to go with that. It's a little bit deeper than what we need to right now. But he was that was offensive to some people. So and going back to the curse words, they're really language. So when I teach the children, my children, it's like, well, Dad, these people don't think that this word is a curse word. And I was like, if someone comes to you and says the word snickerdoodle is a curse word and it's offensive to them, you know what you don't do around them? You don't say the word snickerdoodle.
Right.
So and that's a silly example, but that's what it comes down to. If it's offensive to somebody, just keep your mouth shut. Find something.
Right. Right. And what I'm hearing is kind of what you're getting down to it before we go to the next section. And, the Bible says the fool and his money soon parted. So there's a lot of indications in there where it talks about a person being foolish. And certainly people can be foolish, and we can either bring that to their attention, that they're foolish and they're acting foolish. But it boils down to what's the intent in our heart. Is it to make someone feel bad? Is it to make someone, to call someone out? And I say, you fool. I'm sure there's something there. Remember that in there about removing the beam in my own eye before I remove a speck in somebody else's eye? How many times does somebody go by you in traffic and they're texting with their phone in front of them on the steering wheel? You ever get mad at them? You ever say something? You ever call them out? Why do you call them out? Because it's easier when you text down here and that you wouldn't text on your steering wheel? What a dummy, that person. I can't believe they did that. Look how they're not even paying attention. They're going to be so reckless. When I certainly can text down here because nobody can see it, and I can do this, So it's hard for us not to call people out sometimes. But you know what, brethren, we need to hold back and refrain from ourselves knee-jerk reaction, calling somebody out. Think of how many times someone could turn around and call you out. There's times we can relate so much of this to traffic. It's funny because that's, I think, we're immune when we get in these big machines, right? It takes on our car takes on another personality, and so we're immune. It's not us; it's our car. So we can say things and do things and be rude. But when it's about the person that now here's another thing, right? Sitting at the red light, you're behind the person's in front. What's their responsibility in front of the red light? The person at the beginning of the line, what's their responsibility? All right, they're not to do they have the role and responsibility. Their job is to be staring at the light the whole time, right? They're not talking to somebody, digging. You ever see somebody reaching in their back seat and there are two cars in front of you and they're at the front, you're thinking, what are they doing? And they're reaching, I'm thinking, they're not going to see that light. What an idiot. And I call them out, what an idiot. I've reached that age now. There's so many things. I try to get my list from Darren because he's a little ahead of me. Things that we do, we check off. Well, I'm at that age now. And I've reached that age where I have to tell you, I've been honked at. And I looked up, I'm that person. It's me. I'm the one. Oh, it's a horrible day. It's a horrible day. Hey, Derek.
Also, with so many of these words, and we've touched on this briefly, subtle context is everything, and the way that you use them is everything. And me and Sabrina have talked about this specifically. If you're correcting someone, or anytime you're using words like stupid, fool, words that we're talking about that are not uplifting, which ultimately the words we're using are only supposed to edify and uplift, and if correction is needed, then we use it. But there's a big difference between telling someone they're acting foolishly or saying you are a fool, or saying what you're doing right now is you're acting stupidly, or saying you're stupid. In relationships, and especially with younger people and kids, there's a huge difference in the meaning of you're acting like this or you are stupid.
Yeah, and I certainly wasn't a perfect parent, but Carson can testify to this, that I had my moments of anger, and I let the word come out, stupid. And then I had to catch myself and say, okay, back off. You're acting stupid. I'm not calling you stupid. You're very smart, but you're acting stupid, or you're saying things that are not intelligent, that are not wise. So there is a big difference of that anger and the intent of tearing someone down and building someone up. And I think as Christians, as we grow as Christians and as we grow around each other, we start to learn maybe we don't need to say something right then. We start to learn maybe that, in my mind, let me back up. How's that going to sound if I say, because someone's doing something I need to make a comment on, I need to tell them about it. But think about it and say, well, how are they going to hear that? Will that build them up or will that tear them down? And I always try to relate God and us as children, right? So God's our parent, God's our father. And as parents, we can see a lot of similarities, and we can really see the wisdom of God. And think about how God corrects us. How would God correct us in a situation? Would He say something to belittle us? Would Jesus say something to tear us down? Rightfully so, righteous. And this is where I want to end on that one verse. The fool is righteous anger. I'm trying to think if it says it here, to judge righteous judgment. So there's nothing wrong with righteous judgment on letting someone know that maybe they are being a fool, but don't do it with anger. Don't do it in a condescending way, because sometimes we do need to call people out as Christians. We need to call people out in a Christian manner, and it might not be in public. It might be set them aside and say, hey, look, I just want to let you know here's some things that you said that are really hurtful. Aren't good for anybody to hear, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. Does somebody else have a hand up? So I just want to touch on that, on the fool. That's right, the words, that fool there is a different word. It has totally to do with context. It's the way that we would call someone a fool. You can definitely call someone a fool if they're acting a fool, and teach them how the better way to act. Teach them how Christ would teach them. But there's definitely calling, Jesus is warning here, because He has other things in this context. It's really that if you call your brother a fool, it's not the word that you're saying, it's the intent that you're using it. And as Christians, we shouldn't have that intent that we're better than anybody. We shouldn't have that intent that we're above any other human being. Now, certainly we have the righteousness of God. Certainly we have the privilege of knowing the truth. So we do have that as far as against the world, and we can use that. It is a battle, but as far as righteousness means, I'm not more righteous than you are because I'm a human being, because I know God's will, and so I'm going to use that righteousness to beat you on the head with it. It's the example. Mr. Jim, did you have something on the fool? I thought you said something a while back, made a comment. It's probably been years ago. To add to the part where Jesus talks about a fool. He's got a mic right there. There was something I heard years ago, and you talked about it, and it was spot on.
To my recollection, the word fool in the New Testament means empty-headed.
Right.
And there are a few of those in the world today who do not use their heads properly. And we live in a world where if you say no to someone, if you call them out, as you said, then you're the bad guy. And, you know, we used to have debates, frequent debates in our brotherhood against denominational preachers. And now it's very hard to get them to debate, even on the subjects that we talked about, Christian evidences and that sort of thing. We have a few now and then, but you learn a lot by having this sort of discussion. It shouldn't be an argument. It should be each side sets forth things. But we have people who are foolish, and they don't want to meet us because they have gotten beaten so many times. So we live in a different world. We have to be careful that we don't offend someone.
Yeah.
And it gets into the family too, because...
But, you know, sometimes you need to offend, isn't that true? Wasn't it sometimes you need to offend somebody?
Yes, and that is
Can
true.
Can you offend somebody without calling them a fool? I mean, what I'm saying is, can you offend someone in the right way?
You can.
Not with words of anger.
Yeah.
Not with I'm more righteous than you. But sometimes people need to hear the truth. And the truth will be offensive to them.
It's how we go about it.
Right.
You know, I used to tell when I was preaching, I would tell the story that I heard of a coal miner who died in the coal mine. They finally got his body out, and there were 5 or 6 coal miners, and they said, well, who's going to go and tell his widow? Because it was a close-knit community, and everyone was close. And so they drew straws. Well, a guy that didn't know how to put his words together very well, he drew the straw to go and tell the woman. So he goes and knocks on the door, and he said, Are you Widow Jones? And she said, no, I'm not a widow. Well, that's what you think. Just look coming down the road, there's a body, and it's your husband. Well, he told the truth, but he was foolish the way he told it.
So that's one of those things where we, as Christians, once we learn to control our tongue, once we learn how to control our emotions, this is a big ask, isn't it? Already right there. Once we learn how to refine our speech, then it's tact. Tact comes in there. So that's another part of it, tact. When is it appropriate to say something? When is it appropriate not to say something? How do you say something? You can say something many ways. So anyway, so that, and I mean, there could really be a huge discussion on that, but on why Jesus says, don't call someone a fool, but yet he calls people fools. And we can, I encourage you to go home and read those scriptures, because there's a lot in there that it's not the word that's wrong, it's our intent. Okay, so the next thing I want to get into, I knew that bell was going to ring, and did this last time, because this will be something that, and we actually did touch on it, and can get everybody in trouble in here. I'm looking at you, Bruce. Euphemisms. Euphemisms. Bruce, what's a euphemism? Here, give him the mic. I'm curious. What's going to come out of your mouth? What's a euphemism?
Using a phrase or words, not exactly what you wanted to say, sort of.
Not exactly what you want to say? Euphemism. Does the Bible have euphemisms?
Oh, I'm sure it does.
And an easy one would be when Thomas was asleep. Not Thomas, excuse me. When the Bible talks about being asleep, what's it referring to most of the time? They're dead, right? but they're asleep. Is there a difference between a dead and asleep? The Bible uses live and dead as euphemisms, I guess you could say. Someone in English might need to, a teacher might need to call me out, Carrie or somebody. Is that correct, a euphemism? And is that a correct euphemism in the Bible? Would be a dead and alive versus sleep and spiritually? Okay, so that would be the good side of euphemism. What's the bad side of euphemism is that we need to talk about is this really it stems off what we were talking about cussing last time. We went from cussing into euphemisms last time, and that's where I want to try to finish up. Do we cuss without saying a cuss word? The easy answer is you can, but does it not make it a cuss word when you use a euphemism? And we talked about a little bit euphemisms. Some of the ones that were on here were gosh, dang, darn, heck, shoot, Lord, Lordy, Christ, and that's not even a euphemism. Christ and Lord that's blaspheming if you're not using it in the proper context as our Lord and Savior. You're using it as a foul word. Anyone ever hit their body part and what comes out of your mouth? Okay, that's good. People are afraid to say it, aren't you? It depends on how you grow up as a kid. If you grew up with a granddad that was a farmer, a hog farmer, and we built barns and did all the farm stuff. My granddad wasn't raised in the church, but he was a farmer. The good news is that he converted us over and later in life and really made up for all the time he lost. But as a kid, on the farm, you hear some words. You hear some words when things don't go right. You hear words when hogs get out. You hear words when you smash your hand on something. So you hear those words, right? Well, the problem is you may never say them until all of a sudden you have this rush of adrenaline, this rush of emotion, this uncontrolledness of smashing something. And why does that word come out? Why does a bad word come out of our mouths?
I just wanted to say something about euphemisms too. I know that you're not supposed to use them. I agree, and I was brought up that you don't ever say those words. But unfortunately, a lot of people say those because they've always heard them, and they don't know that that's what they are. And I think we have to be careful about that too, that meanings of words do change also. There are some words that you could say when we were growing up or that they had a different reference, 50 years ago or something, but now they mean something different. So a lot of times we use euphemisms out of ignorance, even like I know when I would have students or people and you pick up words really quickly if you hear them and, other people say them or other adults say them. But I think that we have to think about the intent too. People need to be taught not to use those words, just like you said, like gosh and darn and all those. But I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who use those words, even Christians who use those words, that don't know that they're a substitute for something else.
Well,
so I think we need to clarify that as well.
Don't know could be one thing for sure. But I think even as Christians, we kind of skirt around the edge. And I'm telling you right now today, I can't stand up here and talk about euphemisms and put on my white robe. Now I may not say the bad euphemisms, but it's the intent of how we're saying it and what we're meaning. I'll tell you what, this happened to me last time. I promise you, we'll start next class with this because there's a lot of good things in here that we need to talk about because it's all going to culminate down to. And before we leave, Ryan, what you got real quick, buddy?
Earlier this year, I cut my eye pretty good, and in the heat of the moment, not proud of it, but I might have said a bad word.
Okay.
It's just I could have used a better word, not say anything at all.
We're going and thanks, Ryan. We're going to talk about that next time. Why we use euphemisms? What possesses us to lose control and say a bad word? Why would we ever say that? But thanks for coming and listening, and y'all have a good week.